Hello, this is section 2.2, Banzhaf power. So there's some definitions I'd like you to know to begin with. The first one is a coalition. That means when a group of players decide to vote the same way. And it's just a set, of players. So just a few players or the whole group so let me show you an example. So if there's a weighted voting system of 12, 8, 7, 5, 3, and 2, then a coalition would mean, so of course this is player 1, player 2, player 3 here, player 4, and player 5, right? Because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers that are after the two little dots here. So there's 5 different players. So any subset or just group of them, so like player 1 and player 2, that is a coalition. If they decide to vote together on the same thing, that's a coalition. All right. So another example would be the P1 and P5, just groups. A coalition is just a group of players. All right. The grand coalition is all the players. So the grand coalition, there's only one of them. It's P1, P2, P3. I'm using that same example of this weighted voting system of 8, 7, 5, 3, 4, 2. And so the grand coalition would just be a list of all 5 players. A winning coalition has enough votes to meet the quota. So for example, player 4 and 5, since you need to have 12 votes here to meet the quota, 3 plus 2 is not 12 or greater, or 12 equal to 12 or greater. So that means that actually, when I look at this, the next definition is a losing coalition. So the coalition of player 4, which has a weight of 3, plus and the weight of player 5, you add those weights together, that's 3 plus 2, that's 5, and that's less than 12. So that's a losing coalition. So then a winning coalition would be any 3 that come together and they do make 12 or more. So like the first two, P1 and P2, those 2 players, because that's a winning coalition because their weight is 8 plus 7, and that's greater than 12. So, and when we list coalitions, we don't worry about the order. So like if I list coalition P1 and P2, I would not consider P2 comma P1 a different coalition. That's not a different one. That's the same one. Okay. So when we're listing coalitions, it's non-sequential, which means the order, we're not going to list all the different orders of those 3 people. It's just one ordering of each group that we're going to be listing. Okay. A critical player is defined as without their vote, the coalition could not reach the quota. So in a winning, to figure out if a player is critical, you take a winning coalition. So like that's like the 7 P1 and P2 were together, they're a winning coalition. If I were to take out P2, they decide to vote differently, then I would be taking away those 7 votes and it would leave me with 8 votes. So this would no longer be a winning coalition if we took P2 out. So we would say that P2 is critical. And we're going to underline critical players. But the way you figure out if one is critical or not is you take that player's take them to cover them and take away their points from the coalition and see if it's still a winning coalition. If it's still a winning coalition, that player is not critical. But if you taking them out forces the winning coalition to become a losing coalition, then that player is critical. Critical counts. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be counting the number of times that a player is a critical player, and that's called their critical count. So here's the steps on how we're going to be calculating a Banzhaf power distribution. What we're going to do is we're going to list all winning coalitions. That's going to be all of the coalitions that whose players, their weights add up to the quota or more, right? Like we said, we're going to list it in only one order. So P, like I said before, it may be easier to list just all the different groups of players that could be there, and then you can cross off the ones that are not winning coalitions, if that helps you. Like, just make a list of all the different top possible coalitions and then cross off the ones that are losing, and then that can be helpful to getting that list of all winning coalitions. Anyways, that's the first step. The second step will be, within each winning coalition, underline the critical players. Like I said, we're going to cover a player's votes if the remaining players total less than the quota. The covered player is a critical player. Number 3, we're going to count up the number of times each player is a critical player. That's called their critical count. And let player 1's critical count be denoted by capital B sub 1. Let player 2's critical count be denoted by B sub 2, and so on. Next, we're going to calculate the power of each player. And they use this Greek letter beta. It's like a capital B with a tail on it to denote each player's power. And we're going to do that by taking the critical count for that player and dividing by the total number of critical counts for all the players. So T will be equal to, B1, the critical counts from player 1, plus the critical counts from player 2, plus the critical counts from player 3, and so on for for all the players' critical counts are added. That's that total, and they denote it by T. So the player 1's power is going to look like its critical counts over the total number of critical counts from all the players. Right? And that's what it's going to look like. And if we list every single player's power, then that's the Banzhaf power distribution. So let's see an example. If your classmate Sarah has 5 votes, if James has 3 votes, if Jose has 2 votes, and if Ellie has 1 vote. Then that would be described as this voting system. It would be, well, we don't know the quota yet, so I would just put a Q for quota. But then for Sarah, I'll call her player 1. And usually we like to list the people that have the highest weights. So we'd like to list them first in descending order. So the next person with the highest weight, so the next highest weight would be second. So I would call James player 2, and Jesus player 3, and Allie player 1. And I don't really need those names. So instead, if you want to just write player 1, player 2, player 3, that's fine. So this is player 1. And it's player 3 and player 4. So that's what the weighted voting system would look like. So 3, 5, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, and then they also say use the power Banzhaf distribution to determine the power of each player. But first they say a motion must have 60% of the votes to pass. So we have to figure out what this quota is, and it is 60% of the votes. So how many votes are there total? There's 5 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1. So 5 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1. That's total votes. Which is 8 plus 3, which is 11. Right? 8 plus 3 and 8 plus 3 is 11. Okay. So to find 60% of that, we're just going to find the quota is going to be, I turned 60% to a decimal by moving the decimal. Decimal can always be thought of as to the right of the ones place. So I place the decimal and then move it twice. So it becomes 0.60 times by, and I remember the O and the dot and the of is like a multiplication dot. And so times by 11 and gives us 60% of 11. So, and we calculate that. And I found that number to be, I think it was a decimal, and then I rounded it up to 7. Now, if you do get a decimal answer for the quota, you see if we round down, it's not going to meet the quota. So we want to make sure to meet the quota. So we're going to round that number up. So it's 0.6 times by 11 is 6.6. And we never round down. We're not using general rule. We're just rounding up. Round up. So 2.7. If we got a whole number, then that whole number would just be our answer. But if we get a decimal, then we round it up. So next we need to, and we go back to the rules here. So I'm going to rewrite this. This is, so instead of putting a Q here, that's actually not a 9, it was a Q. We should probably put like this. There we go. Now it looks more like a Q. Okay, so this, now we know the quota is actually 7 and 5, 3, 2, 1. So now we have the weighted system written out. Next, we're going to list all of the winning coalitions. So like I said, in this first step, list all winning coalitions. So, and we don't, you're tempted to actually list the numbers, but I always list the players, not the numbers, not their weights. So I will say that I'm going to work with all the two groups of 2 coalitions of 2 that are winning coalitions. And I always start with the highest weighted people, because once I work, once I get go to the smaller numbers, then I can stop at a point, because we know that any coalition would have less than a winning coalition. So I'm going to say player 1 here and player 2 together, they would have 8 points, because 5 plus 3 is 8. So that's more than 7. So that's a winning coalition. So I'm going to list that. Like I said, I'm not writing 5. I'm just writing the players' names. Okay. And then I'm going to look at all of the coalitions of size 2 that could be that first of all contain player 1. So now I'm going to look at player 1 and player 3 because it's a different group than player 1 and player 2. Player 1 and player 3 together make 7, so that's going to also be a winning coalition, so I write it down. Then player 1 grouped with player 4, I'm going to write it down, but if it's not winning, I'm going to erase it. So player 1 has 5 and player 4 has 1, so 5 plus 1 is 6, which is less than 7, so that's not a winning coalition. So I'm going to erase it. Okay. Then we have to continue. We have to think about all the players that all the two sets of 2, or sorry, groups, coalitions of 2 that might be winning coalitions. So we thought about all the ones that contain 1. Now we can think about all the ones that contain player 2 but do not contain player 1. So maybe player 2 and 3. So I look at player 2 has 3 points, player 3 has 2 points, so 3 plus 2 is 5, which is less than 7. So this is not a winning coalition. So I'm going to go ahead and erase that one. 2 and 4, but 4 is going to have even less amount, right? So if I consider 2 and 4 now, well, it's going to have an even less amount of points because player 2 and player 3 had more points than player 4. So I'm saying is if player 2, this was not a winning one, right? Well, if I grouped player 2 with someone with even less points than player 3, then I'm definitely not going to be winning. So I know this is not a winning coalition either. And then the only one that we could check left is maybe the ones that don't have player 1 or player 2 or player 3. I'm sorry, don't have player 1 or player 2, because 2 could go with 3 and 2 could go with 4, and we already did those, but the last one to think about is 3 and 4, and that would be 2 plus 1, which is 3, which is less than 7, so that would not be a winning coalition. So we would just erase that one. So I only listed the winning coalitions here, but if you like, you could list all of them. And it does kind of help you to keep them all in track and better, if you will. So whatever is easier for you, because we've got to keep this organized. So anyways, these are winning coalitions of size 3. So right away, I noticed that P1 and P2 are winning coalitions. So if I add anybody to that group, then that's also going to be a winning coalition. So I'm going to add automatically P1, P2, and P3 are going to be winning. And we could figure that out because that's 5 plus 3 plus 2. That's 8 plus 2, which is 10, which is greater than 7. So that definitely is a winning coalition. Then P1, P2, and P4 are going to be a winning coalition because P2 and P1 by themselves are a winning coalition. So, but if we want to double check, that would be 5 plus 3, which is 8, plus 1, which is 9, which is greater than 7. So that's why that is a winning coalition. Okay, then we considered all the ones with P1 and P2. All the different groups of coalitions of 3 that are P1 and P2. Next, I need to think about ones that have P1 but don't have P2. So that would be P1, P3, P4. And so let's just write it down and see if that has enough points. So P1 is 5, P3 is 2, and that's 7. Yeah, and then so P3 is 4. So yeah, and I should have known that already, that I would have a winning coalition because 1 and 3 were a winning coalition by themselves already. So that is a winning coalition. And then, okay, so now we've thought about all the different groups that could possibly happen with P1 involved. So now we think about groups that have that do not have P1. There's only one group that doesn't have P1. It's P2, P3, and P4. And so let's see, that would be 3 plus 2, which is 5 plus 1, which is 6. So that does not have enough points to be a winning coalition. So these are all of the winning. Wait. And then I forgot one more because there's 4 players. There's the grand coalition, which contains all of them. So that's P1, P2, P3, and P4, right? And that's all of the different coalitions that could possibly come about. So next, what we do, and we'll go back to the next step. Now, within each winning coalition, underline the critical players, or by cover a player's votes. If the remaining votes total less than the quota, the covered player is a critical count player. So I'll do that. And I'll just hoover my little, as I think of blotting out one character, I'll hoover my my pointer over them. So I think of player 2 here. Player 2 has 3 points. If I take 3 points away, that leaves just player 5, or player 1, who has 5 votes. 5 votes is not more than the quota, or the quota or more. So here, critical to this player, player 2, is critical. If I take away player 1, player 2 has 3 votes, which is less than 7, so they also are a critical player. In the group of P1 and P3, that means I take away, it means I have, player 3 has 2 votes, but if I take them out, then P1 would have 5 votes, which is not enough to have for 7. So they are critical, which I read the line early, sorry. Okay, if I take away P1 from this coalition, then I'm taking that 5 out, so then it would leave just the 2. 2 is less than 7, so P1 is also critical. Usually when you have all sets of 2, usually both people are critical, because if that was not the case, then you'd have a dictator, and most of our examples, I think all of our examples usually don't have dictators in them. But it could happen. But the textbook, usually most examples, they take out the ones where somebody is a dictator. So usually both people are critical in the groups of 2. All right, let's move to the coalitions with 3. So I take out this player 3 from I'm considering this first group here, player 1, player 2, player 3. If I take out player 3, well, I already know that player 1 and player 2 could still win it because it's a coalition already listed over there by itself. Okay, but we could remind ourselves that player 1 has 5 and player 2 has 3. So 5 plus 3 is 8, which is greater than 7. So if we took out player 3, player 1 and player 2 could still win without player 3. So player 3 is not critical. I'm not going to underline them. All right, if we take out player 2, that leaves player 1 and player 3, so that player 1 has 5, player 3 has 2. They would have enough points without player 2 to win the coalition. So player 2 is not critical. So if I look at player 1, I take and we take them out, then player 2 and player 3 are left. So then 3 and 2 are left, but that's just 3 plus 2 is 5. So that is less than the quota 7. So player 1 is critical here in this coalition. Now looking at the next coalition of 3, player 1, player 2, player 4. If I take out player 4, Then player 1 is 5 points. Player 2 is 3 points. That's 5 plus 3 is 8, which is bigger than 7. So player 4 is not critical. If I take out player 2, then player 1 and player 4 are left. So I'll have, that's 5. Player 1 has 5, player 4 has 1. So 5 plus 1 is 6, which is less than 7. So if I take out player 2, then 1 and 4 are not going to have enough points to make this a winning coalition. So player 2 is critical. So I underline them. If I take out player 1, that leaves 2 and 4. 2 is 3 and 4 is 1. So 3 plus 1 is 4, which is less than 7. So player 1 is critical. Okay. So if we have 1, 3, and 4, if I take out 4, they're 1 point. So 1 and 3 would be 5 and 2, which is 7, which means that they'd still be a winning coalition without 4. 4 is not critical. If player 3 is taken out, that means you'd have player 1 and player 4 left, which means you had 5 points plus the 1 point, which would be 6 points, which is not enough to be a winning coalition. So player 3 here is critical. If I take player 1 out, then player 3 and player 4 would give us 2 and 1, which would be 3, which is not enough to be winning coalition. So player 1 is critical. Last but not least, the 4 player coalition. If I take out 4, I know just by looking at the coalitions of 3, winning coalitions of 3, that player 1, player 2, and player 3 are still a winning coalition without player 4. So player 4 is not critical. If I take out player 3, I can see from my list of winning coalitions under 3 that 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 4 is still a winning coalition. So P3 is not critical. If we take, I'm doing this a little bit differently by looking at my other winning coalitions already. But if I take out player 2, then if I have player 1, player 3, player 4, that's still a winning coalition because I can see it under my winning coalitions list for 3. So player 2 is not critical. If I take out player 1, notice how in my list of winning coalitions that have 3 people in them, player 2, 3, and 4 is not one of them. So that means player 1 here is critical in this group of 4. So next, what we do is we list the number of times that player 1 is a critical player, and we call that capital B. So the critical counts, it's the critical count. So now we count the winning coalitions, or the number of times we underlined it, that player. So player 1 is a critical player in this winning coalition. So that's 1, 2. Let me see if I can get a pointer for you guys. So it's 1, 2, 3. Maybe. Sorry, I want to have a pointer for you guys, but okay, so I'm just looking, I'm going down and I'm counting the number of times I underlined P1. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I underlined it P1 6 times. Then P2. I underlined P2 1, 2 times. P3, I underlined 3, 1, 2 times. And P4, I underlined it no times, so 0 times. So now we calculate the total number of critical counts. So that's B1 plus B2 plus B3 plus B4. That's the critical counts from everyone added together. And that is 6 plus 2 plus 2 plus 0. So that is 10. Now, to find the actual power for each player, It's represented by this beta, which looks like a capital B with a tail. So that is going to equal to the critical count of that player over the total critical counts. So for player 1, that's going to be 6 over 10. This is going to be the critical count of player 2 divided by the total. So it's going to be 2 over 10. And this one's going to be the critical counts for player 3 over the total. So it's also 2 out of 10. And then the last one is the critical counts for 4 over the total. So it's going to be 0 out of 10. If we simplify those and write them as decimals, 6 divided by 10 is 0.6. And if I move the decimal twice to the left, remember for every trough, you have to put a 0. So that would become 60.6 is written as 60%. Then this would be 2 over 10 is 0.2, but move the decimal twice. And for every trough, there needs to be a number. There's already a number. There's a 2 here for this first trough, but the second trough needs to have a number. So I put a 0 there. So it becomes 20%. And this one's 20% as well. And 0 divided by 10 is just 0. So that's 0%. So this player 4, even though like they're like, I have a vote, I have 1 vote, they actually never made a difference. They never were the person that was needed to make a winning coalition. So they didn't actually have any power, even though they have votes, which is a strange thought. So they call this character a dummy player, a dummy player. And it's not that we're not insulting their intelligence, it's just the name of it. And it's a derogatory term, but it's just the way they name it. So I apologize about that. Anyways, this is an example of Banzhaf power. I hope you found this valuable. Bye.